Welcome to the fifth installment of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program's Ottoman Greeks of the United States Digital History Project's Remembering 1922 video series. In this and all upcoming episodes of the series, the names of the interviewees have been coded to protect their identity. This episode presents the experiences of expulsion, escape, and migration from small cities, towns, and villages located in Central Asia Minor. Greek and Anglophone historiography identifies this region as Cappadocia. Starting from Kayseri, Maria relates the story of her paternal family's tragic expulsion.
Papu's father worked in Constantinople, that he was a lot more advised about what was happening politically and tried to get his family out. Papu's family, his sister was raped. Another sister who was younger died. I don't even know her name. Sister, who was the oldest, ended up on Chios, the island of Chios, and had her daughter there, and she died in childbirth, and eventually sent to an orphanage on Evia. Papu, I know he lived in Trieste. He left Constantinople and then went to Trieste, which at the time was not Italy. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And he worked as in a hotel in some capacity. And he did the same thing in Constantinople to earn enough money to get there. So their family didn't have enough money for them to pay his passage. He had to earn it. So Papu went to Trieste. He worked there for a while, long enough, less than a year. I don't know exactly how long. And so in Trieste, his ship's manifest says from Trieste to New York City.
The migration experience of Maria's maternal side reveals a migration route through southern Asia Minor, which, as we will see, was common for many immigrants and refugees fleeing Cappadocia.
My yaya was exiled or, sent out. She was in the French area they didn't have it as bad as many others. They were able to take some things with them. But I remember her saying all of their gold or their coins were taken from them and they were given paper money, which had no value when they got where they were going. But she went by train for part of it. She'd never been on a train. She said it wasn't comfortable at all, so I'm imagining it wasn't a real, it probably wasn't a typical passenger train. But her family, her siblings and her parents is one group intact. My yaya's family, because when she emigrated, they went to Adana and then were put on a ship with no food on it, she said. And when they got to Greece, there was no further to go, so they were on the ship transport for a while. And they were sent on the other side of Corinth. They went through the Corinth Canal. I guess they just didn't know what to do with these people and tried to spread them out. They lived for the first week or two in a church, sleeping on the floor. And she said they all smelled, and the parishioners complained that these dirty people were stinking up their church. So then they were sent somewhere else, and I think they were kind of shipped around for a while until they sent the family to Evia, the island of Evia, because they were building orphanages there. Somehow, my Papu's mother, she ended up in the same area on Evia. They arranged a marriage. he left New York 17 April 1924 to meet her. And so I know that they courted for approximately 2 months there. And Yaya told me things that happened that would never have happened in the village. For example, I don't know what the equivalent is in Greek or Greek culture, but somebody would have always gone with them in Spanish it's called a duena, to make sure nothing happened, chaperone kind of person. And she said because nothing was normal and there weren't the people to do that, they got to walk all over. They just walked because there was nothing else to do, and sometimes they'd take a picnic or something like that. And that's how they got to know each other. And she was really didn't like her mother at all. They did not get along. She loved her Yaya very much and was very close with her Yaya. So she was allowed to do these things. And she said one of the things that happened as a result was she had done her laundry of her undergarments, and there was stained blood in her panties, and her mother flew at her in a rage that she would become a whore and all, you besmirched the family name. And she said our diet was terrible, and I had hemorrhoides, which I'm sure was hemorrhoids, and everything she said had an accent, her own accent to it. It's not a typical Greek accent. It's more that Turkish Greek accent, I guess. But at any rate, she was furious and humiliated about it because I would never have done that. So that was part of their atypical courting. But they got married there. She got a passport in Athens, and they left. So. And she did not come through Ellis Island third class because they were married and he had the money to come through. And they left Piraeus on the King George. On the 23rd of October 1924, they arrived in New York.
Mark's family followed the same southern route of escape, this time from Bermuda. In addition, his grandfather fled conscription, a migration factor we have seen repeatedly in previous episodes.
My grandfather was already in the United States. I think where they were in central Turkey, they weren't bothered as much, until late. They were left alone. The Greeks were, in that region were kind of left alone until, late in the game, like 1918, 1919. My understanding of how my grandfather left, he was about to be conscripted by the Ottoman army for the Balkan Wars, and he and a bunch of relatives managed to escape to Greece, and where they were promptly conscripted by the Greeks to fight the Ottomans in the Balkan Wars. And I understand my grandfather left, and he had an aunt who lived in France. And he got there, and she gave him the money for his passage to the U.S. My grandmother, how they left their village just before the catastrophe. She said that she had a brother that was well educated and was in a high position in Constantinople. And basically the only people left in the town by then were the women and the young kids. And her brother got word to them. And the brother told them to sell everything and leave. Sell what you can and just leave and go to Greece. And he also told them, head south in the direction of Mersin. Do not go to Izmir, or do not go to Constantinople. I suspect he probably knew that the war was turning against the Greeks, and there was going to be a bloodbath, and he was trying to tell them to get out of there, and then also not go in the direction where they might get into a war zone. I guess Mersin was under Italian control, and at the time, they got the first boat they could that went to Greek, and so they went to the island. They were taken to the island Corfu, and they stayed in Corfu for a couple years, and then went to Piraeus. We did find some records on my grandfather, and he left from the port of Trieste. He went to Baltimore, and they lived in Baltimore. It seems like all the people from his town who immigrated to the U.S. had two destinations. They either went to Baltimore or they went to New Haven, Connecticut.
Smyrna was the port of departure for Steve's family, who were originally from Semendere.
My grandfather, my mother's side, he was a Hamal. My grandfather, my father's side, I'm not sure what he did, but he was working in Constantinople. And then what happened was they started to draft all the Greek men in the Turkish army. A lot of the Greek men did not want to serve in the Turkish army, and they fled. And my grandfather fled from Constantinople and he went to Romania. And then from Romania he came to New Jersey, Camden, New Jersey, and was a carpenter just before the outbreak of World War I. That left my grandmother and my father and his siblings in Semendere, Turkey, is basically eventually my grandmother died so they were basically orphans in Nia Semendere until after the war in 1925, when my grandfather was able to bring them over from Salonika, Greece, because they had moved, they changed the population. When they went to outside of Salonika to Nia Semendere, my father was 16 at the time when they left Turkey, and he only lived 1 year in Semendere, in Salonika. He was in the hospital. He had a disease of his leg. And so they put him in the hospital. And after 1 year, then he was 16. Then he was able to come to the United States. My grandfather brought him and all the siblings to the United States. And at that time, he was in Detroit, Michigan. He had a hotel called the Royal Hotel, because that was the auto industry. And he opened up a hotel on Fortin Junction in downtown Detroit. And then after the Treaty of Lausanne, they had the exchange of population. So my mother was 6 years old, and when they, told them they had to leave the village of Semendere, and she told me about the boat when they left, had to pack up all their belongings and leave Semendere, and they took them to Smyrna and they put them on a boat and shipped them, to northern Greece, and some of the deaths that occurred on the voyage. Some people died and they just threw them into the sea. One of the relatives, they said it was a trying time. Plus, she told me they shaved their heads when they left the port. They shaved all the women and men's heads, and they were bald, and they were kids. They were crying. Here they're leaving what they knew was their homeland, going to a different country that they never really knew about, even though they were Greek and had the Greek religion and the Greek church. And they were basically Greeks, but the mainland of Greece and Greece itself was like foreign to them. They were born in Asia Minor, so they were going to a new land for them. And then my father went back 10 years later. He was 26 years old, and he wanted to get married, so he went to the village where he knew all the family was from Semendere, and he met my mother, and they got married in Nia Semendere, 1935. My father brought him back. He spent 6 months in Semendere, Nia Semendere, and then he had to come first, and then my mother came.
Steve also recalled a candid moment about his father's immigration to the U.S.
Well, my father naturally told me that he had to go to Chambord, France. And then from Chambord, France, he said he got on the USS Varon. And then he came to Ellis Island, 1925. And what happened was he was detained for a week in Ellis Island. And his problem was my father had a disease on his leg. He had a bone disease. And he was 16 years old. And he was afraid they were going to send him back. So he did tell me one time that, the doctors came to examine him, for coughing or whatever, and they told him to put his pants down, and he said he only put his pants halfway down because he didn't want him to see the sore on because he was afraid they were going to send him back. And he was detained for 1 week at the Ellis Island, so he said he was very fearful that he wasn't going to be able to enter the United States. But finally my uncle came, his older brother, and then took him to Pontiac, Michigan.
In this episode, we saw migration routes and locations of onward migration that were not mentioned in previous episodes. Mersin and Smyrna after its destruction being used as a port, and Corfu, Romania, Trieste, and Cherbourg, France, as short-lived stops en route to New York. We also heard tragic stories of expulsion and escape. For our next episode, we return to the Western Ottoman Empire, and specifically to the islands in the Sea of Marmara. The researchers at the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program's Ottoman Greeks of the United States Digital History Project would like to thank you, our listeners, for your support of this important research. We look forward to your comments and hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed producing it. See you next time.